So, a direct challenge to the credibility of global journalism, even as a global narrative about Nigeria is under scrutiny. A New York Times investigation has traced how what it says is unverified and methodological weak data produced by Emeka Umeagbalasi, a Nigerian activist and executive director of Intersociety, traveled from Google searches into US conservative politics, helping to fuel claims of a Christian genocide in Nigeria and ultimately shaping policy in Washington. The New York Times reporting suggests that those claims by Mr. Umeagbalasi, echoed by Fox News, Republican lawmakers, and the White House, rested on figures that were rarely verified, often inflated and sharply at odds with independent conflict data. A separate BBC investigation reached the same conclusion, that Nigeria's violence is real and brutal, but it is not a one-sided religious extermination. It is a crisis of state failure affecting Christians, Muslims, and others alike. Well, now a counterattack has emerged from supporters of Mr. Umeagbalasi, accusing the New York Times of bias and political motivation. That response warns of real-world consequences when advocacy, lobbying, and culture war politics distort complex conflicts. So the question tonight is not whether Nigerians are dying, they certainly are. At the heart of the dispute are broader issues about how global media reports conflict in embattled countries and about the limits of data in Nigeria's insecurity crisis, and whether those limits, exported as moral certainty, have misled the world. What does accountability look like when journalism, activism, and power collide? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now exclusively by the Executive Director of Intersociety, Emeka Umeagbalasi, to interrogate the claims, the evidence, and the controversy. And Mr. Umeagbalasi joins me now on the line from Enugu. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you for granting Arise the exclusive right to talk with you. I know a lot of people have been trying to do that, so we really appreciate your coming in to speak to us. Just before we get to the controversy, let's be clear about who you are. You've been described by the New York Times primarily as a market trader who runs an NGO from home. Can you briefly outline your professional background and how you came into the human rights space, as briefly as you can?
Thank you. Thank you very much, my brother Charles. sorry about what had just happened. It's part of nature. Emeka Umeagbalasi has been a grassroots human rights campaigner, a volunteer human rights activist since in his 20s. That is dating back to 1994. I grew from the scratch to the point level I am today, and that is me. You know, I started with the Civil Liberties Organization, from there to Amnesty International, and of course, Human Rights Watch in the United States, where I elsewhere as an associate member. In the Civil Liberties Organization, I rose from the position of Campaign and Publicity Secretary back in 1999 to the position of Southeast Vice Chairman of the Management Committee of the Civil Liberties Organization. At the level of Amnesty International, I joined as a member and rose to become
Go on, we can hear you.
Onitsha Group. Okay, I rose to become the Onitsha Group coordinator of Amnesty International Nigeria. And from there, having shared the Civil Liberties Organization, Anambra State branch for years. And from there, I voluntarily, because it's an elective position, so I voluntarily stepped down in 2007. And in 2008, myself and others of like minds joined hands in forming this International Society for Civil Liberties and Rule of Law. And by the special grace of God, I have taken the Intersociety to a greater height. Unlike that is often being used, no one person can, pilot the affairs of an organization. So Emeka Umeagbalasi is doing this in company of a group of dedicated occupational professionals who are measured in various occupations where they ache their decent living. Likewise, myself, like you rightly said, people said, I'm now a screwdriver salesman. I agree. Everybody has a background, and that is where I started from. So I agree with you. So that is the brief history of who I am to civil society or human rights community and activism in Nigeria. As Intersociety, which I headed today, is a member of various international coalitions, including International Alliance Against Genocide since the year 2020, and many other, proving credentials that time may not allow me
to okay. Well, thank you very much indeed.
Roll out here.
Right. Thank you for setting out that stall. Clearly, you've got some activist and human rights pedigree behind you. Even though you are admittedly a screwdriver salesman, but you are more than a market trader. So let's talk about how this story that's gone international began. Who first contacted whom, you or the New York Times?
Well, we were on our own when New York Times contacted us. That lady in question happened to have come to us some time ago after the NSAS killings, during which she interviewed us on a number of issues that we investigated, including the Ezu River body floating of January 2013, and of course the Obibo Army massacre and the abductions of October 21 to November 2020, and other related issues. So banking on that kind of relationship. So the woman returned. Motive is one of the most difficult things to be detected in a situation of interpersonal relationship. So she returned, and we resisted her return because of the timing and other circumstances. But she went and introduced to us one of our longtime friends by name Chideleke, who writes for This Day newspaper. She brought him, and she was able to convince us that this woman meant well. In fact, it was at that particular point in time that I even insisted on having her picture, because what I found on her profile was a flower. So I insisted on having her picture, and it was she who helped us by rolling out her pedigree as a West African bureau chief of New York Times and others. Although we, at the 11th hour, got intel information that New York Times, he saw her controversial in their reporting. But we said supposedly every media organization, whether local or international, somehow exists for protection of humanity. I'm not aware of any media organization that exists for destruction of humanity. Until
Times got in touch with
New York Times. So
right, so they're the ones who got in touch with you.
So New York Times got in touch.
Right, okay.
Sure. Sorry, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Just try and keep the answers reasonably short so we can gallop ahead. And when the New York Times reached out, what data did you provide them, and what caveats, if any, did you attach to that data?
Well, the data, just like going by your introduction, I somehow disagree with your introduction because BBC never came for investigation. They came for purpose of
carried out
discrediting
its
our
own
data.
independent investigation. The BBC carried out its own independent
For how long?
investigation, and it's there for the public to see. Well, that's not the argument. The fact is that they carried out an investigation.
Okay,
but let's crack on with this.
Let me land. Thank you. Like I said, BBC and New York Times, to our own definition, never carried out any investigation. They are here to discredit us. But like I told you, motive is very, very difficult to be detected. But I think we dealt with BBC. Little did we know that they planned another, they planted another one, which is today called New York Times. So about the data you are talking about, that data has been in existence since 2009. Every year we have data. Very soon you are going to read our data where we will give you the breakdown, yearly breakdown of the patterns and trends of the killings in Nigeria on the ground of religion. There are so many types of insecurity. By the way, I don't want to promote myself, but I think I have a criminological background. So there are so many types of insecurity. Here we are dealing with religious insecurity. We are not talking about political insecurity or economic insecurity or ideology or what have you. So we are dealing with religious insecurity. We have a report that is page 280 that we produce in Eastern Nigeria. That one covers all sort of, a lot of political insecurity, military insecurity, and so on and so forth. That one is aside. The one we are talking about is religiously motivated or generated insecurity.
Let me pick you up on that. Yes. Let me pick you up on that, because the New York Times reports that you rarely verified deaths independently and that you often relied on secondary sources and online material. Can you tell us clearly and specifically how many of the deaths attributed to your data that you personally verified, and how, as briefly as you can?
Well, let me come in here with due respect. But based on what you said, New York Times didn't do any investigation. They said we admitted. That's the report. They said we admitted that we don't often verify our data. That's the exact word of New York Times. Do you understand? And to that extent, we disagree. It is totally incorrect. That was not what we told you in New York Times. How can we, if we can tell New York Times that we don't often verify our data, then what's the sense of allowing them to come in? What are they coming to do? Since we have admitted. Do you understand? So that is incorrect. That is very, very incorrect. Then about the data, and the New York Times also became economic with the truth. In our report, we stated it clearly that right to freedom of religion is not restricted to Christians alone. That when you talk of religious freedom, Muslims also have right to freedom of their religion, likewise Christians. That explains why in our report, we clearly stated from our estimate, that is gathered from many angles, primary data sources, secondary data sources, that it is estimated that between 2009 and sometime in 2025, that no fewer than 125,000 Christians and estimated 60,000 moderate Muslims were killed by Islamic jihadists. We are not talking about killings. We are not referring to data released by National Bureau of Statistics belonging to Nigerian government that stated that between 2023 and 2024, 614,000 Nigerians were killed as a result of insecurity. That is not the data we are talking about. We are talking about religiously motivated killing.
Right.
That's the one we are referring to.
Okay.
That is our own data. And let me also tell you, Charles,
right,
quickly.
Go ahead.
Quickly.
Go ahead.
You can never be part of a data you never generated. And let me also make it clear as a criminologist that what rules the world in matters of criminal justice administration is circumstantial evidence. Even if you go there, you go to the crime or scene of crime, you only go in there to be told of what happened. You were not there when the whole thing happened. Whether primary or secondary sources, you were not there. You must be told a story. That is exactly the point.
Right. You have a point. You certainly have a point there.
Primary data or second.
Right. You have a point there. And I think many people will agree with that when you go there, a lot of things, including the way journalists work as well. I mean, you depend on eyewitnesses and a lot of other sort of secondary data. But the New York Times reported that you assigned religious identities to victims based on location and context rather than confirmation. And you've been quoted as saying you rarely verify deaths directly. In a country as complex as Nigeria, what does verification actually mean in your work? And is it responsible to label deaths as religiously motivated when the victims' identities were not verified?
No. Let me tell you. I mentioned it before. The one we are dealing with, in fact, I'm going to send a copy of that, our report of 2024 to you, 280 pages. You will see what is called a compendium of report on general insecurity in eastern Nigeria. That is not what we are referring to. Here, we are dealing with religiously motivated killings. And for instance, if you go into secondary sources of data, the secondary sources of data are further divided into 3 or 4 or 5. You have, for instance, in religiously motivated killing, in the context of killing of Christians, for instance, you have general media report. You have specialities, a specific media report. That is, media report reported by, for instance, there are journalists that specifically go out there to investigate killing of Christians, for instance, in several places, like in Plateau, like in Benue, like in southern Kaduna, and so many other places. As a long-time human rights campaigner and investigator on religious violence, we are fully aware of where to get this data from. We are fully aware of who and who through all these sources. I'm not saying that we are there. I'm not saying that we are there. I've clarified on that before. We are fully aware of that. Because, for instance, you have open doors report, you have Christian Post report, you have what do you call it? Name them. You have what are these? You have True to Nigeria report. These groups I'm mentioning are those who specifically, you have Christian Death Morning Star report. These are the people, these are organizations who specifically, follow the patterns and trends of killing of Christians in those places, like in the northern Nigeria. And we, at the level of Intersociety, also have our people and our eyes and our tentacles in terms of the conduct of the Nigerian military in terms of internal security operations in eastern Nigeria and so many other places. So it is not true that our report on killing of Christians is based on exaggeration. There is no exaggeration.
Okay,
let me also remind you.
Yeah, just very briefly, because we're running out of time.
Very quickly, between 2015 and 2018, most of our advocacy on religious freedom was focused on the persecution of Shiite Muslims. It's there on the public, what do you call it, in public domain. Persecution of Shiite Muslims. That is the people they call Islamic movement of Nigeria.
Right.
They are one of their barristers is my friend Barrister Ichak. So it's not the issue. So we are talking about religious freedom, religious persecution, not Christian only persecution of Christians. We're also talking about, we have also talked about persecution of Muslims, like Shiite
well,
Muslims in Nigeria.
you've made that
the
point.
records are there.
You've made that point, and that's a very important point to make, because that clarifies your position as someone who is, gathering data on religious persecution in general and not specific to that of Christians. Nevertheless, your claims were cited by US politicians and echoed by the White House, contributing to a policy narrative that culminated in American military action in Nigeria. Do you accept any responsibility for how your data was used internationally?
Well, my data are the data of Intersociety couldn't have led to the bombing, specific bombing, or singling out Sokoto or some parts of the north for US-Nigeria joint military action. So there is no way our data could have, because we are a very innocent non-state actor civil society organization. So if you are equating our data to what happened in Sokoto by Nigerian government and the United States government, that means you are also equating us as a military establishment, a state coercive or state actor establishment, which means we have become CIA, we have become DSS, we have become Nigerian Armed Forces, we have become US military.
I'm simply asking you...
The world is divided into...
Right. I'm simply asking you the questions based on the report. Hold on a second. I'm simply asking you the questions based on the article that was written by the New York Times. Those were the claims that they made. Now, your claims were cited by Fox News and by US senators and echoed by the White House. At what point did you realize that your work had crossed from advocacy into geopolitics?
I'm not aware of that, and the Intersociety is not aware of that question. I mean, that's your submission. Like I told you before, we have nothing to, our data has nothing to do with the attacking the American, Sokoto or what have you. The essence of data is for the issue to be addressed. And when we started producing that data, since 2009, we even wrote several letters to Nigerian government. Minister of this, minister of that, chief of this, chief of that, inspector general of police, inspector general of police, that. Yet, there was no response. And I want to clarify here that we are also students of statistics and students of international politics, international relations. So, if, for instance, you are making a justice call, your justice call can transform from local justice call, if unheeded, to regional justice call or sub-regional justice call, if unheeded, to international justice call. We even wrote in ICC. The ICC has jurisdiction to address some of these issues. So that is the thing. So any of these groups, any of these local or international establishment that finally accept, look, Intersociety is one of those organizations that has spoken out severally over a decade over this particular issue. Likewise, started other groups, Open Door Report, and so many other that. Like I told you, Intersociety didn't produce all those. The data Intersociety is just human rights monitors and trackers who rely on secondary and primary sources to be able to aggregate and congregate our data. And once our data is done, we put it out there. So that is the thing. So anybody equating what we have done for purpose of protecting humanity to what happened in Sokoto, that person, so New York Times was very, very mischievous, very, very mischievous, and very, very wicked to have cited that, to have framed that kind of headline. Do you understand? It's just only if we knew. In fact, this one defied me as a criminologist. I must tell you the truth. I didn't even know. Motives, I don't know why motive is very, very difficult to be detected. If I had detected that motive, that woman wouldn't have come near us. Do you understand?
Right. Okay.
So look at the framing. Look at the dangerousness of the framing. Well, what is the business of what we have done with what happened in the Sokoto? And the real Nigerian government and US government came out openly to acknowledge to take responsibility of that kind of joint action. Why? Okay, now let me ask you, Charles. Are you aware that that interview was conducted on 16th of December? 16th of December, during the off-office season. Now, what is the business of interview conducted on 16th of December? And what happened on 25th of December? What is the business 9 days after? So
their argument.
New York Times and BBC.
Right. Unfortunately, we're actually out of time.
We are not dealing with arguments.
We're out of time, but their argument.
We are dealing with facts. We are not dealing with arguments.
Their point is that that interview that you gave, or that data you supplied that was subsequently put out, eventually led to the action that happened on the 25th of December.
That is not.
Well, you've made the point, and so I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but we literally are out of time. But I think you've made the point.
Let me just 1 minute.
Very, very quickly, 20 seconds.
Let me. Charles, how many times have you seen Emeka Umeagbalasi or heard that Emeka Umeagbalasi or any of his lawyers was flown to United States because of this thing? What about those bishops and others that have gone to United States 4 times, 5 times to testify, and you are calling, you come back here to call us?
Well, I mean, we're simply going by the reportage of the New York Times, which is a hugely respected international news organization, and indeed one of the most respected in the United States.
That is a job. It's not a report.
But that's your point. Your point is essentially. It's not a report. Yeah, hold on a second. Your point, and you've made that point.
It is clearly intended to discredit an existing data which they have failed.
You've made that point.
That's a hard job.
You're saying that
I didn't know that New York Times was created for destruction of humanity.
Okay. Well, listen, on that note, I want to thank you very much indeed. Emeka Umeagbalasi is the Executive Director of Intersociety, and he was talking to me on the line there from Enugu. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.